People ask me why I don't wear a watch anymore. I spent 61 years repairing them. I can disassemble a Hamilton pocket watch with fingers that shake like old radiator pipes. Can diagnose a faulty escapement will by sound alone, that tiny, irregular skip in the ticking, like a heart that's lost its rhythm. I know the smell of machine oil mixing with particular dust that collects inside a watch case that hasn't been opened in 30 years. Mineral, almost sweet, like something preserved that was never meant to last. But I haven't worn a watch since I turned 85. Not because I've stopped caring about time, because I finally understand what I traded for it. My shop sat on the corner of Brennan and 4th, in a mid-sized Ohio city that peaked sometime around 1962 and has been negotiating with its own decline ever since. The kind of city where the good diner closes and gets replaced by a vape shop, and everyone acts surprised even though they saw it coming for a decade. I liked it there. Still do. Even though I haven't been back in 6 years. Not since my hip made Stairs into Enemies, and my daughter moved me down here to Tucson, where everything is flat and bright and smells like sunscreen. My father opened the shop in 1951. He'd learned the trade in the Army, of all places. Turned out there was a sergeant in his unit who'd been a watchmaker in Stuttgart before the war, and the man needed something to do with his hands in the long, hollow hours between assignments. So he taught whoever would sit still long enough. My father sat still. He always had that quality. Stillness. I used to think it was patience. Later I understood it was something else entirely. I took over the shop at 23, when my father's eyes went. Macular degeneration. A watchmaker losing his close vision is about as cruel as it gets. Like a pianist losing feeling in his right hand. He never complained. He sat in the back of the shop for years afterward, just to be near the sound of it, the ticking. Sometimes I'd look up from the bench and catch it with his eyes closed and this expression on his face I couldn't name then. I can name it now. He was trying to memorize it. Here's what I want to tell you, and I want you to understand that I'm not saying it to be poetic or profound or whatever word people use when they mean impressive. I'm saying it because it's the only true thing I figured out in 91 years of being alive, and I learned it so late that sometimes, on the bad nights, when I can't sleep and Tucson sits silent and orange dark outside my window, it feels less like wisdom and more like a verdict. We move through our lives like we're watching them from the next room, present enough to see what's happening, not quite there enough to actually feel it. And the tragedy, the real one, not the deaths and the losses and all the things you expect grief to be made of, is that we do this voluntarily. We choose the next room, every single day. I chose it for 60 years before I understood what I was doing, and I have the receipts to prove it. I married Carol in June of 1959. She was 21. I was 24. She had this laugh. I want to describe it right, so stay with me. It wasn't the pretty kind of laugh you see in movies. It was too real for that. It honked slightly at the end, the kind of laugh that embarrasses itself. And she clapped one hand over her mouth after, like she was trying to catch it, eyes going wide. And that whole sequence, the laugh, the honk, the mortified clap, that whole thing just destroyed me. Every time. 54 years. We had the shop. We had a daughter, Rennie, who came along in 1963 and immediately began a lifelong project of testing every limit we'd ever set. We had a house 12 minutes from the shop, a dog named Fletcher who destroyed 3 couches over the course of his life, a rotating cast of neighbors, the usual American infrastructure of barbecues and arguments and holidays. We had a life, a whole one, full and noisy and real. I was barely in it, not because I didn't love them. God, I love them. I still love them. Carol's been gone 11 years, and I love her with the specific, aching precision of someone who's had more than a decade to notice every place she's missing. No, I was barely in it because I was busy with it. There's a difference, a crucial, ruinous difference that nobody ever spelled out for me, and I wish the hell someone had. Being busy with your life is not the same as living it. A watchmaker's work demands a specific kind of attention. Total, consuming. You are bent over a movement that contains, in some cases, over 300 individual components. Springs thinner than human hair, jewel bearings the size of a poppy seed, gears whose teeth are so small you count them by feel. One misplaced piece, one tremor of the hand, and you've set yourself back an hour. The work does not tolerate distraction. I love that about it. That absolute enforced focus. And I brought that same orientation home with me every evening. I was always thinking about the Elgin on the bench, the Bulova that had been giving me trouble for 2 weeks, the backlog of repairs piling up before the holidays. I sat at dinner, and I was in the shop. I lay in bed, and I was at the bench. I was home in body, and somewhere else entirely in mind. Carol knew. She never said it directly. She wasn't a dramatic woman, Carol. Didn't go in for confrontation or ultimatums or any of that. But sometimes she'd be talking, and she'd just stop, mid-sentence. And she'd look at me with this expression that wasn't quite sad and wasn't quite annoyed. More like someone who is watching a door close, slowly from the wrong side of it. I'd say, "What? I'm listening." She'd say, "I know." And she'd go back to whatever she was doing. She knew I wasn't listening. I knew she knew. We both knew. And we just kept having that same conversation with the same ending for 54 years. Because tomorrow I would be more present. Tomorrow the backlog would clear. Tomorrow things would slow down. I cannot tell you how much of my marriage happened in that tomorrow, in that forever pending, never arriving tomorrow. Rennie left for college in 1981, Ohio State. She called on Sundays the way kids did then, because long-distance rates were lower on weekends. The calls lasted maybe 15 minutes. I remember them mostly as background. I'd be at the kitchen table with a cup of coffee and a movement I brought home to look at, and Carol would talk to Rennie, and I'd half listen, and occasionally I'd take the phone and say the dad things. "How are your grades? You eating enough? Good, good. Here's your mother." I thought that was sufficient. I thought presence meant being in the room. Rennie is 61 now. She lives in Portland, does something with urban planning that I've had explained to me 4 times and still can't quite hold. She's good. She visits twice a year. We talk on the phone every Sunday still. Now I'm the one who needs a call, who watches the clock an hour before it comes. And sometimes when we're talking, she'll go quiet in a specific way, a way I recognize, a way that is distinctly, unmistakably, heartbreakingly her mother's. And I know she's waiting for me to actually be there. I try. It's harder than it sounds when you spend 60 years building the habit of absence. Here's the memory that undid me, the one I return to. Even now, even at 91, it was August 2003. Carol and I were at our kitchen table. She was doing a crossword puzzle. She did one every morning, had since we'd been married. Same newspaper, same pen, never pencil. And I was working on a vintage Omega Constellation that a customer had brought in. Beautiful piece, mid-century, the kind of work you get excited about. I was completely absorbed. Carol said something. I said, She said something else. I said, hum. And then she laughed. That laugh, the honk, the clap, the wide eyes. I looked up, confused, because I hadn't heard the joke, and she was looking at me with an expression I can only describe as fond and heartbroken at the same time, which I didn't know was possible to feel simultaneously until I saw it on her face. She said, "Never mind, Eddie." It wasn't important. It was the last normal morning we had. That afternoon, she went to lie down after lunch, something she never did, and when I checked on her an hour later, her speech was wrong. Stroke. She survived it. Survived 3 more years, actually, though the last of them was hard, but she was never quite Carol again after that morning, not in the ways that mattered most. And I have turned that morning over my hands 10,000 times since. She said something. I said, She laughed. She said, "Never mind." What was the joke? What did she say? I will never know. I wasn't there. I was 3 inches away and I was not there. And she is gone and I will never, ever know what she was going to tell me. That is not a small thing. That is the whole thing. I want to be careful here because I know how this kind of story goes. Old man looks back, says life is short, tells you to put down your phone and smell the roses, and everyone nods and feels briefly moved and then goes back to scrolling. That's not what I'm trying to do. That would be easy and also useless. What I'm trying to tell you is something harder. I'm trying to tell you that you're not going to listen, not because you're a bad person, because you're a person, period, And people have this extraordinary gift for believing that the rules of mortality and regret apply to everyone except themselves. We are all, every one of us, quietly convinced that we are somehow the exception, that our marriage can absorb neglect indefinitely, that our parents will stay reachable just a little longer, that our kids won't stop needing us before we're ready to show up. I watched my father sit in the back of the shop for 15 years after he lost his vision, just to hear the clocks. I thought it was sweet, sad, maybe. I didn't understand that he was trying to tell me something. He was trying to tell me, pay attention to what you have while you still have it in full, because you don't get to know which Tuesday is the last ordinary Tuesday. I was too busy to hear him. He died in 1989. I was at the shop. There's a particular kind of repair that watchmakers call a full service. You take the entire movement apart, every single piece, down to the smallest screw. Clean everything, replace what's worn, oil what needs oiling, and put it all back together. When it's done right, an old watch runs like new, better than new. Sometimes, because the metal has settled into itself. I serviced thousands of watches over 60 years. I was meticulous, patient, thorough in a way I was not thorough about much else. I never once gave my own life a full service. Never stopped, took it apart, examined what was worn, asked myself what needed replacing. I just kept it running, barely, always forward, always toward the next thing on the bench. You do a full service on a watch because you value it, because you understand that something this precise, this intricate, this irreplaceable, it requires actual attention, not just winding, not just keeping it going. Real, deliberate, unhurried attention. Your life is the watch. The people in it are the movement. And you are performing the bare minimum of maintenance and calling it enough. It isn't enough. I know because I did exactly that. For 60 years, I wound the watch and called it enough. And then one morning in August 2003, a woman I loved for 54 years laughed her honking, self-mortified laugh at something she thought to share with me. And I said, ma'am. And then she was gone. Not all at once, but gradually and then completely. And I've been trying to remember that joke for 11 years. And I never will. My granddaughter visits me here in Tucson. Her name is Maya. She's 28. She works in marketing or something adjacent to marketing. The specifics blur together when she explains it, but she's sharp and kind and she has Carol's hands, which still catches me off guard sometimes. Long fingers, nails kept short, the same way of gesturing when she talks, like she's conducting something. Last time she came, we sat on the back porch in the early evening because the heat in Tucson is murderous until the sun drops below the mountains and then it becomes something else entirely. Warm still, but gentle, the air going the color of old honey. She was telling me about a man she'd been seeing. I won't share the details because they're hers, but she was working through something, some confusion about what she wanted versus what was easy, and I was listening, really listening. Both feet in. It's a thing I practice now. Deliberately, like physical therapy, because 60 years of the opposite habit doesn't dissolve just because you've decided to change. And I watched her talk, really watched, not just looked, and I thought, this is it. This is the whole thing. Right here. Her hands moving, the honey-colored air, the particular way she pauses when she's searching for the right word. This is the whole thing, and it's available to me completely right now, this second, and I am here for it. That feeling is available to you too. It is available every single day. You don't have to nearly lose everything to access it. That's what I need you to understand. You can just decide to be there. The catch, and here's where I stop being comforting, is that deciding once isn't enough. You'll decide, and then tomorrow you'll be distracted and unavailable again, and then you'll feel guilty, and then you'll get used to the guilt, and then you won't feel it anymore. This is not pessimism. This is just how humans are built. We return to our defaults. So it can't be a decision. It has to be a practice. Something you return to over and over. The same way you'd return to the bench after lunch, after phone call, after restroom break. You sit back down. You pick up the loop. You look at what's actually in front of you. Return to presence. That's the whole job. I need to tell you about my friend Walt. Walt Okafor ran the hardware store 2 blocks from my shop. We've been friends since 1968, which is a kind of friendship that's less a relationship than a geological formation. something that was laid down slowly over decades and is now just part of the landscape, so permanent you stop noticing it. We had lunch every Thursday. The same diner, the same table by the window, the same waitress for about 30 years until she retired and moved to Florida and sent us a postcard that we both still have somewhere. Walt ordered the same thing every week for decades. Turkey club, no tomato, coffee black. And I used to give him grief about it because the menu had 22 items and he'd made his choice sometime around 1973 and never looked back. He'd say, "When you find the right thing, Eddie, you don't need to keep looking." He meant the sandwich. I think he also meant other things. Walt had a son, Marcus, who'd moved to Seattle in his late 20s and built a life there. Good career, family, the whole structure. Walt was proud of him. He talked about Marcus with his chest-out energy that fathers get when their kids turn out okay despite everything. But Marcus didn't visit much. For hours by plane, expensive, busy. The reasons were real, and they were also in the way that real reasons can be just reasons. Walt never complained about this. He'd bring up Marcus's achievements the way you bring up weather. Easily, naturally, no agenda. And I knew enough about Walt to know that the easiness was work, that he'd made a decision to not be the father who guilt his kid, who created obligation where there should be choice. I respected that. I didn't fully understand it. Walt died in 2009. Heart attack. Fast. A Thursday. We'd had lunch 3 days before. Turkey club, no tomato, coffee black. He'd told me a story about a customer who tried to return a ladder he'd clearly used all summer. We'd laughed. I'd been slightly distracted by something at the shop. I don't even remember what. Some repair I was anxious to get back to. Marcus flew in for the funeral. He looked, I don't want to say hollowed out, because that sounds literary, and what he looked was just regular grief, which is its own kind of hollow. We talked for a while at the reception, and at some point he said, "I kept thinking I'd get out here more. I kept thinking there was more time." I said, "I know." And I did know. I absolutely knew. I'd been thinking the same thought about different people my entire life. Knowing it didn't help. That's the thing nobody tells you. Knowing the lesson and living the lesson are two completely separate skills. You can understand intellectually that time is finite and people are irreplaceable, and presence is the only thing that actually matters, and still come home every evening and eat dinner in the next room of your own life. Because knowing feels like doing. It isn't. My father kept a notepad next to his workbench. Moleskin, black cover, one of those little elastic bands to hold it closed. He wrote down everything he noticed, not repairs. Those went in the official log. This was different. He'd write things like, "The Mendez boy came in with his grandfather's Hamilton today. His hands shook when he held it." Or, "Cold front coming. Can feel in the Waltham spring. It contracts in the cold. Runs about 30 seconds fast." Small observations. The texture of days. I found that notepad when I cleaned out the shop's back room. 10 years after he died. There were 6 of them, going back to the early 1950s. I read all 6 in one night, sitting on the floor of my shop with a lamp I'd pulled close because my own eyes weren't what they used to be. He'd been paying attention to everything. All of it. Every detail of every day. And I'd been right there in the shop with him for years. First as a kid hanging around after school, then as his apprentice, then as his partner. And I had missed almost all of what was in those notebooks. He'd been seeing and I'd been present. And those two things are not the same. And I sat on that floor for a long time understanding that I had essentially been handed every day. A gift I was too distracted to unwrap. He wrote about me, too. Regular entries. Over the years. He wrote, "Eddie fixed his first mainspring today. Didn't tell him I was watching." He wrote, "The boy works too fast when he's anxious. Need to teach him that the movement isn't going anywhere." He wrote, "In 1979, when I was 44 years old, Eddie came by with Carol and the baby. Carol looks tired, but good tired. Eddie was looking past the conversation, back to the bench. He needs to slow down. I don't know how to tell him. He didn't know how to tell me." I read that, and I put the notebook down, and I sat there for a while on the floor of his shop with the clocks going around me, because I kept them all running, even in that room, even after he died, because the silence felt wrong, and I thought about everything I hadn't let him tell me. The movement isn't going anywhere, he used to say. He meant the watch part. He meant there is no urgency here in this work with this tiny machine. Go slow. Pay attention. He meant everything. Let me tell you what the last 10 years have looked like now that I'm mostly still. After Carol died, after I sold the shop to a nice young woman named Priya, who keeps it running and sends me photos sometimes, after Rennie moved me to Tucson, after all that settling, all that quiet, I found out what I've been avoiding. Myself, my actual life, the interior of the days I've been moving through. It was uncomfortable, at first, like a room you kept locked for years and then finally open, the staleness of it, the dust, the strangeness of everything being exactly where you left it. All those years of being busy had kept me from being alone with myself. And now I was alone, and what I found was grief I hadn't fully processed, joy I hadn't fully felt, moments I'd half experienced and then filed away, thinking I'd return to them. You can't return to moments. This is the one immutable law. They happen and they're done. Not gone. They live in you somewhere, but the living of them, the actual animal warmth of being inside them, that's once. One time only. No repeat, no rewind, no future opportunity to experience that specific August evening, that specific laugh, that specific conversation with a friend who ordered the same sandwich for 40 years and meant something by it. And so I started doing something that, if I'd seen an old man doing it at 60, I'd have thought was sad. I started paying attention to small things. The quality of light in the early morning before the heat builds, here in Tucson. The smell of rain on dry ground. Petrichor. Maya told me it's called one of those words that's exactly right. The way of phone in my hand when Rennie calls. And her voice before she's fully awake on Sunday mornings, still a little rough. The way voices are, and how it's the same voice she's had since she was maybe 12. Underneath all the adult phrasing and professional competence. The same voice. Maya's hands. The specific way my neighbor Henry chuckles when something strikes him as genuinely funny versus performatively funny. There's a difference, a quarter-second delay. I've cataloged it. This is what presence actually feels like. Not a grand spiritual experience. Just noticing. Just being curious about what's actually in front of you, instead of what you're about to do next. It's so simple. That's the cruelest part. I spent 60 years complicating my way out of something that is, at its core, embarrassingly simple. Here's what I know about the watches I fixed for 60 years. A watch is not a complex machine, because it's hard to understand. It's complex because it has to do something almost impossibly difficult. It has to measure something that cannot be touched, slowed, or stopped. Time is the only material that disappears at the same rate regardless of what you do with it. You cannot save it, bank it, or borrow more. You get what you get, and then it's gone, and that's it. The watch doesn't make the time. It just shows you where you are in it. Most of us live like we confuse the watch for the time. We track it, manage it, optimize it. Our schedules and our planners and our little calendar blocks. And we mistake that tracking for actual living. We look at the face and think we're looking at the thing. The thing is not on the face. The thing is the person across from you, right now, who has someone say that they maybe haven't figured out how to start. The thing is the unremarkable Tuesday evening that, in 20 years, you'll remember as one of the good ones without knowing why. The thing is the phone call you almost didn't make, the detour you almost didn't take, the 5 extra minutes you almost didn't stay. The thing is always, stubbornly, right in front of you. I just needed 91 years to stop looking past it. I don't wear a watch anymore because I don't want to look away. Not because I think I'm dying. I might be in the way we're all always dying, but I feel okay. The hip gives me trouble. I sleep too much. The usual complaint of a body that's been used hard and long. But because I finally understand what my father was doing, all those years in the back of the shop, eyes closed, listening to the clocks. He wasn't mourning what he'd lost. He was there, completely there, in the only moment that existed. I'm not telling you to quit your life and go meditate on a mountain. I'm not telling you that your work doesn't matter, or your ambitions are hollow, or any of that. I don't know your life. I know this. There is someone in your life right now who, if you asked them what's actually going on with you, would tell you something real, something they've been waiting to say, something they've assumed you're too busy to hear. You might be too busy to hear it. You don't have to be, Put down whatever is in your hands, metaphorically, if not literally, and ask them, and then just stay. Stay in the conversation. Don't plan what you'll say next. Don't let your mind drift to the thing on the bench. Just be in the room, the actual room, with the actual person, in the actual unrepeatable moment. Because I have had approximately 60 years of almost listening and approximately 6 years of actually listening, and I can tell you the difference is not subtle. It is the difference between watching your life from the next room and living it. I know which one I'd choose if I could go back. I know which one you still can. Last week, Maya called on a Wednesday, which was unusual. Midday, not her normal pattern. I picked up and she said, "Grandpa, I don't have a reason to call. I just wanted to talk." I said that's the best reason. And we talked for an hour and a half. Nothing important. Everything important. She told me about the rain in Portland, a book she was reading, a funny thing that happened at the grocery store, the man she'd been thinking about. Update. Things were complicated in the best possible way. I sat on my back porch in the Tucson evening, and I held the phone with both hands, and I listened to her voice, which is Carol's voice underneath, which is Rennie's voice sideways, which is something entirely its own. I didn't miss a single word. It was the best 90 minutes I've had in years. It was ordinary. It was everything. It was so close to what I could have had all along if I hadn't spent 60 years choosing the next room. Don't choose the next room. That's all. That's the whole thing. That's what 61 years of watching clocks will teach you if you're paying attention.